Hello and welcome back to A Christmas Carol Annotate with me. My name is Miss S. We have already done the Stave 1 annotations in the previous videos, so if you haven't already watched them, then please go ahead and watch them before you continue to watch this, because this video will be on Stave 2, just the beginning of Stave 2. So we have already met the character Marley, the ghost of Marley, who came and visited Scrooge and told him that he will be visited by 3 ghosts. So we will meet the first ghost in Stave 2 today. Like I've mentioned in my previous videos, we will be referring to this quotation booklet. So this is a revision booklet where we have collected quotations already for Stave 1. So we've already got the quotations for Stave 1, and that today we will be adding to the quotations for Stave 2. So if you haven't already printed this, the revision booklet off, then it is in the description box below, so feel free to print it off. It is a really good resource for you to use in preparation for your mock exams, your assessments, and your final literature exam in the summer. And it's a really useful tool. I know that my students have found it useful in the past, so please, I would encourage you to print that off and make use of that free resource. Okay, so we will now start to look at Stave 2. So I'll be explaining it and annotating it. Feel free to pause the video here and grab your copy of A Christmas Carol. You might want a hard copy or you might want a digital copy. It's up to you. There's plenty of digital copies available on Google. Okay, so we'll start reading Stave 2. Stave 2, the first of the 3 spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of the bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. So to his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, it isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro, and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of the first of exchange pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge, or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. So this isn't that important, and that's why I'm not really explaining it. We will be annotating the most important parts. So far, Scrooge has just woken up and cannot believe that he slept through an entire day and an entire night, and it is now 12 o'clock, so he's in complete disbelief. Scrooge went to bed again and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? So he's wondering whether seeing Marley's ghost was a dream or not, but it's bothering him a lot. Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3/4 more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong! 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong! 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong! The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy one. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside. So here we've got the repetition of the curtains of the bed, right next to Scrooge being drawn apart, which is alarming because of the sudden proximity, closeness. So proximity means closeness of the ghost. I tell you by a hand, not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn. So just to make sure that we're certain of how shocking this is, he then uses the declarative that not the curtains at his feet or his back, but those next to his face are where the ghost is. We can imagine exactly how surprised and afraid Scrooge would be in this moment. Dickens then repeats curtains of the bed again to emphasize this moment of surprise and alarm. And Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. So here, we've mentioned before in Stave 1 how Dickens uses a conversational style. He uses it to make it light-hearted, to make it entertaining. And here we've got the idea of the narrator Dickens standing at our own elbow, which might refer to the story being read out by someone else, read out to us like a storybook is at night time, or it might be a little joke from Dickens to scare his readers. Remember, he said in his preface that he's haunting our houses pleasantly with this tale, so it could be a reference to that. It was a strange figure like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. So here, the ghost is described as a child, so it's important that the ghost looks like a child because it could symbolize hope and potential, but also that we're being told that Scrooge's childhood has impacted on his present self. So all of the ghosts that we meet have some form of a connection to the story that we're going to be taken to in terms of Scrooge's life. So we get the impression that we will be told about Scrooge's childhood in this stave because the ghost is a child. But then Dickens goes on to say, yet not so like a child as like an old man. So the ghost looking also like an old man connects the past and the present. So we know that we are going to see how Scrooge became the character that he did. So from a child to an old man, how he became that old man. Viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. So the phrase uncommon strength, when speaking about the ghost's hold, could represent the importance of the message of this ghost. and the hold it will take on Scrooge's life and Scrooge's lessons as well. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. So one simple interpretation of this passage here, of the holly and the summer flowers, is that the holly, a wintry emblem, represents the old Scrooge, while the summer flowers represent a new beginning. And further layers of interpretation. So remember, I have spoken about AO2, Assessment Objective 2, which analyzes language in detail, but also is where you identify writers' methods. It's really important when aiming for the higher grades, grade 7, 8, and 9, that you add as many layers of interpretation as you can, and also try to think of your own interpretations as well. So the fresh green holly might be a religious reference as well to the symbolism of holly. So the red berries could represent Christ's blood, and the prickly leaves represent the crown of thorns Jesus wore on the cross. So this can link to Scrooge's redemption. Jesus' death was believed by Christians to be part of God's plan to save humanity. So perhaps we know that Scrooge will be saved as well here. So there's lots of symbolism used here, and it's up to you to tease out the meaning. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light. So the jet of light from the ghost's head is the means he has of revealing the memories and shedding light on Scrooge's past. So light also symbolizes hope. So perhaps this light that the ghost is emitting is symbolic of the hope that Scrooge has of changing, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which is now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered, now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted. So each of the ghosts that visit Scrooge have a unique and supernatural quality. This one has the ability to grow and dissolve body parts. Perhaps this symbolizes how the ghost will help Scrooge to adapt and change. But maybe you can think of other ways you can interpret this. So can you think of anything else this changing ghost might mean? Think about obviously making your response stand out. Think about reading between the lines and thinking outside of the box. For the top end, so for level 5s and level 6 candidates, so grades 9, top 8s and 9s, it's really important that you think of your own opinions. So attaching your own opinions to your responses makes for a really critical and perceptive response. So here, can you think of anything else this changing ghost might mean? If you can think of some ideas, it would be great if you can put them in the comments box below, because it would really help other students, and I'd love to see some of your really unique ideas and critical ideas as well. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? Asked Scrooge. I am. The voice was soft and gentle. So what we see throughout this passage is this, the semantic field of gentleness or kindness used when describing this ghost. So you'll pick up on it now that I've mentioned it, that there's a purpose for this, and I'll go into it in a bit more detail in a moment. singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap and begged him to be covered. So Scrooge here begs the ghost to cover his light because he is afraid of what he will see. He has buried the memories of his past, of his childhood, that the ghost will reveal, and he isn't ready to face them. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap and forced me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?" So the ghost is upset that Scrooge wants to cover his light, as he is one of the reasons for darkness. So Scrooge is one of the reasons for the darkness. There seems to be a contrast between the optimism of the supernatural characters and the pessimism of the earthly characters within A Christmas Carol. The ghost, by mentioning worldly hands, seems to challenge what right Scrooge has to dismiss his lesson. Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. So Scrooge is following a pattern here. He asked Marley what he was doing there when Marley arrived. Now he's asking this ghost the same question. When the ghost says your welfare, your reclamation later, he says as well, we see that he will go through a spiritual change rather than a physical one. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. So Dickens here again integrates Scrooge's voice for humour. So remember, I've mentioned before the addition of humour in what is a supernatural story. So what would traditionally be a scary story? Supernatural stories are often obviously scary, threatening, critical stories. Here, there's the addition of Scrooge's voice to show the amusement and the humour and the entertaining factor of it. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. So throughout this passage we'll see quotations such as "gazed upon him mildly," "gentle touch," "observed the ghost." So the semantic field of kindness used when describing the ghost all create a non-threatening ghost. It is important that Scrooge is not too afraid of the first ghost, so that he can embrace this lesson. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." So the ghost has taken him next to a window and is asking him to jump. But obviously Scrooge is saying, "I'm a human being, I will fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. So, like I said earlier, semantic field of kindness is used to describe the ghost's handling of Scrooge, to show how the ghost is not threatening, again to ensure Scrooge isn't too afraid of embracing the lesson. He was conscious of 1,000 odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. So here there's the use of, I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, asyndeton. So here we've got the use of polysyndeton. So the repetition of "and" in a sentence, which slows down the pace. You could say that perhaps there's the use of this polysyndetic list to show, and the slowing down of pace to show how overcome Scrooge feels by the feelings he's about to encounter, or the areas that he's visiting right now. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost, "and what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. So the unusual catch in Scrooge's voice shows his first moment of emotional vulnerability. That the ghost's touch appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling suggests that Scrooge will be moved by this ghost. Obviously, he's got a tear on his cheek, but he's saying that it's just a pimple. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it?" cried Scrooge with fervour. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognising every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts, driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other, until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travellers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways? For their several homes, what was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done to him? So within this passage, we see that Scrooge will be open to change as he gets so excited about the people he remembers, wishing each other Merry Christmas, something we haven't seen from Scrooge before. So this is a direct contrast to the earlier Scrooge we saw. So in Stave 1, when he's described using the semantic field of coldness or of anger or stinginess. So here we see a different, more positive Scrooge, a rejoiced Scrooge, a happy Scrooge. This end part of this paragraph is really important because we later find out why Scrooge feels so resentful of Christmas time. "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still." So this is a really key quotation. So the images of Scrooge alone in the schoolhouse are the first images to make us sympathise with the character and begin to understand him. This particular quotation as well reminds us of an earlier quotation where Scrooge was described as solitary as an oyster. So this repetition of solitary showing how neglected and lonely he is, whilst obviously in the first stave we see the self-inflicted loneliness, how he inflicts loneliness on himself because he likes it that way. But here we get the impression that it's not self-inflicted, that he doesn't have a choice, that he's lonely out of choice because he's neglected by his friends. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. So we see again a really vulnerable Scrooge with the way he reacts to certain incidents within this particular scene. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach-houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold and vast. There was an earthy savour in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight, and not too much to eat. So here we've got the semantic field of neglect and loneliness. The description of the school building mirror Dickens's own views of the Victorian schooling system. What I'd really like for you to do is, after this video, go onto Google and just Google Dickens's views on the Victorian schooling system. Okay, it will give you lots of different things that Dickens said about the Victorian schooling system and how he criticised it and disliked it and the reasons for it. Okay, and that's why there's the semantic field of neglect and loneliness used, because Dickens is criticising the Victorian schooling system by describing the schools in this way. Remember, it's important to know about these contextual things, about Dickens's views about the Victorian era, because it gives you the marks for A03, Assessment Objective 3. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these a lonely boy was reading, near a feeble fire. Again, we sympathise with this character, so this young Scrooge, this little boy Scrooge, and begin to understand why he distances himself from people. Perhaps it's a coping mechanism, or perhaps it's as a result of the neglect he faced as a child, so he doesn't feel like he can form close bonds with people out of fear of further neglect. So remember, it's important to have your own interpretations. If you do have any other interpretations about this, then again, feel free to jot them in the comment box. And Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his forgotten self as he used to be. So earlier we saw him sobbing, and here we see him weeping. So the semantic field of crying used to show Scrooge's reactions to his younger self. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the panelling, not a drip from the half-thawed water-spout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door. No, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence, and gave a freer passage to his tears. So we see how these memories, these recollections, these visions are having a really, really, truly emotional impact on Scrooge, how he is softening. Remember, there was the use of the semantic field of hardness when describing his character before, but here we see the semantic field of softness used. So Dickens juxtaposes the language that he uses when referring to Scrooge. Okay, so the juxtaposing language from stave 1 to stave 2 here, used when referring to Scrooge, highlighting how he has gone from hard, so stubborn and difficult, to soft, so emotional and vulnerable, showing how the lessons are beginning to take their effect already. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba! Yes, yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that." "Poor boy! And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother, Orson. There they go. And what's his name? He was put down in his drawers, asleep at the gate of Damascus. Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the Genii. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" So here, Scrooge's loneliness is emphasized here as he resorts to storybooks. So these are all, Ali Baba, Valentine, the princess, Genii, Sultan's groom. All of these are fictional characters. So he resorts to storybooks and fiction to escape the reality of the isolation he feels as a young boy. So reading was a form of escapism for him. So this could be quite relatable for us, or we could see him again in a more vulnerable, sensitive light, and we begin again to sympathize with him even more. The idea that a child is left alone at Christmas time in school, and the only form of company he has are these fictional characters. To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. So he's talking about his business friends. So he's contrasting his business friends, the people who are only interested in money and greed, to this carefree character, this character of pure innocence. "There's the parrot!" cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is, poor Robin Crusoe," he called him when he came home again after sailing round the island. "Poor Robin Crusoe! Where have you been, Robin Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was a parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. "Hello! Hoop! Halloo!" So again, he's seeing fictional characters, and he's really excited by seeing these fictional characters that gave him so much comfort and that gave him company at such a dark, lonely time. Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy," and cried again. So again, the semantic field of crying used. Scrooge is presented as emotional and vulnerable, which makes us sympathize and like him. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff, "but it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." So this is Scrooge reflecting on his rejection of the carol singer who he rejected in Stave 1. We see that this is him beginning to reflect on his actions and their consequences, and he feels remorseful and guilty for his treatment of them. So we see the changing character of Scrooge emerge. The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." So I'm going to stop here because the video has been long enough, and we will meet Scrooge a bit older in the next video. Okay, so in terms of the quotations that we have gathered, and these are the ones that you need to gather in the section of the booklet Stave 2, Scrooge at School. So, a strange figure, like a child, like an old man. Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice. A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still. So you might want to pause this on this screen now so that you can record these quotations. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found it useful. If you are finding our videos useful, then we'd be really grateful if you could like them, and if you could subscribe to our channel. It would be really, really great if you could do that. Like I said, guys, if there are any layers of interpretation or other interpretations that I haven't mentioned in my analysis of A Christmas Carol, feel free to add them in the comments. I'd love to read all of your unique responses. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. See you next time.